On February 21, 1972, President Richard Nixon arrived in Beijing, shaking hands with Premier Zhou Enlai in a moment that dramatically reshaped the Cold War. That historic meeting, following decades of isolation, signaled a profound strategic realignment against the Soviet Union, fundamentally altering global power dynamics. Today, a similar, though perhaps more immediate question hangs in the air. What does the sudden, high-stakes summit between the United States and China mean for the future of the Middle East and the global order? Right now, on May 14, 2026, inside the Grand Hall of the People in Beijing, two of the world's most powerful leaders sat down face-to-face in one of the most consequential summits of the decade. This meeting occurred just 24 hours after a deadly 300-minute naval confrontation in the Strait of Hormuz pushed the United States and China to the brink of direct conflict. President Donald Trump met with Chairman Xi Jinping for their first bilateral summit of 2026. I am World Brief Live, and today I am bringing you the complete, uncensored picture of what really happened in Beijing. The deals that were made, the messages that were sent, and the dramatic impact this summit is already having on Iran, the Strait of Hormuz, and the global order. In this high-stakes meeting, China agreed to purchase 200 Boeing 737 MAX aircraft and 600,000 barrels of American crude oil per day, a deal worth approximately $10 billion per month. Both sides also issued a joint statement declaring that Iran must never acquire nuclear weapons and that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open for global energy trade. This massive economic package, following a direct naval confrontation, is highly unusual. Historically, such swift, large-scale agreements after a near miss often indicate a pre-negotiated understanding, suggesting the Hormuz incident may have been a catalyst rather than a genuine surprise for Beijing. This is not just another diplomatic handshake, this is a strategic earthquake. While the world was still processing yesterday's dangerous naval standoff in Hormuz, Beijing and Washington have suddenly changed the game. China appears to be tilting toward America on the Iran issue, a move that could reshape the entire Middle East in the coming weeks. I have spent the last several hours analyzing every detail from the summit, the joint statements, and the immediate reactions on the ground. In the next 20 minutes, I will show you exactly what this means for Iran's regime, the future of the Strait of Hormuz, and why the next 48 to 72 hours could trigger a major shift in the global balance of power. You are getting this deep analysis before most mainstream outlets have even connected the dots. If you are watching right now, you are in the right place. The picture is now crystal clear, and it is far more serious than most people realize. Stay with me, let me paint the full picture for you. Inside the opulent halls of the Great Hall of the People, under the watchful eyes of towering portraits and red banners, President Donald Trump and Chairman Xi Jinping concluded their first bilateral summit of 2026. The atmosphere was tense yet calculated. Handshakes were firm, smiles measured, and every word carried enormous weight. This was not a routine diplomatic meeting. This was great power bargaining at its highest level, coming just one day after Chinese and American warships stared each other down in the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz. The agreements reached were both substantial and symbolic. First, China committed to purchasing 200 Boeing 737 MAX aircraft. This massive order provides a critical lifeline to America's aviation industry, while giving Beijing modern passenger jets it desperately needs for its domestic market. Second, and perhaps more strategically important, China agreed to buy 600,000 barrels of American crude oil per day, a commitment worth approximately $10 billion every single month. This is not a small adjustment. It represents a major shift in energy trade flows. But the most significant outcome was the joint statement issued at the end of the summit. For the first time in years, the United States and China publicly declared in unison two critical positions. Iran must never be allowed to possess nuclear weapons, and the Strait of Hormuz must remain fully open for global energy commerce without interference. Let me be very clear with you about what this really means. For years, China has maintained a careful balancing act, buying cheap Iranian oil while publicly staying neutral in the Iran-West conflict. Today, that balancing act appears to be ending. By signing this joint statement, Beijing has effectively signaled that it is willing to put meaningful pressure on Tehran in exchange for economic and strategic concessions from Washington. This is a historic pivot. China imports roughly 11.6 million barrels of oil per day. Iran has been supplying around 1.6 million of those barrels at heavily discounted prices. Now, by committing to large-scale purchases of American crude, Beijing is preparing the ground to gradually reduce its dependence on Iranian oil. This single move carries far more destructive power against the Iranian regime than any military strike could achieve in the short term. Think about it. Cutting off Iran's oil revenue would starve the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, of the money it needs to pay salaries, fund proxy militias like Hezbollah, and maintain its iron grip on Iranian society. This is economic warfare of the highest order, quiet, precise, and devastating. The timing of this summit was also no coincidence. It came immediately after the dangerous 30-minute naval confrontation in the Strait of Hormuz. By sitting down with Trump so quickly and reaching these agreements, Xi Jinping sent a clear message to the world. China is not interested in escalating into direct conflict with the United States over Iran. Instead, it is choosing pragmatism and economic self-interest. However, this shift creates an immediate crisis for Tehran. The Iranian regime now finds itself increasingly isolated. Its most important economic partner is beginning to tilt toward Washington. Its lifeline of discounted oil sales is under threat, and its nuclear ambitions have just been publicly rejected by both superpowers. I have studied the body language, the wording of the joint statement, and the immediate market reactions. Oil prices dipped slightly on the news while Boeing shares surged. Behind closed doors, Gulf capitals from Riyadh to Abu Dhabi are watching these developments with intense interest. America's traditional allies suddenly see a new possibility: a united front between Washington and Beijing against Iranian disruption in the energy corridor. Yet we must not be naive. This is classic great power diplomacy. China is not abandoning Iran out of goodwill. It is leveraging its relationship with Tehran to extract maximum concessions from the United States. Better trade terms, technology access, and perhaps reduce pressure in the South China Sea. The picture is now crystal clear. What happened on May 14th in Beijing marks the beginning of a dangerous new phase for Iran. The regime in Tehran is being squeezed from multiple directions at once. And as I will show you in the next chapter, Iran's response has already begun with a 5-day military exercise named Martyr Commander that reveals both defiance and deep underlying weakness. Stay with me because what China just did in Beijing may prove far more consequential for the future of the Middle East than any naval standoff in the Strait of Hormuz. The game has changed, and it has changed faster than most analysts expected. Let me show you the real numbers behind this strategic earthquake. China is the world's largest oil importer, consuming a staggering 11.6 million barrels of crude oil every single day. Of that massive appetite, Iran has been supplying approximately 1.6 million barrels per day, roughly 1/7 of China's total daily imports. This is not just trade. This is the financial lifeline that has kept the Iranian regime breathing for years. And here is what makes it even more dangerous. Iran sells this oil to China at a deep discount, between $8 and $10 cheaper per barrel than the global Brent benchmark. For Tehran, this arrangement has been a quiet financial goldmine. For Beijing, it has been a reliable source of cheap energy while maintaining plausible deniability on the international stage. But after yesterday's summit in Beijing, that arrangement is now under severe threat. China maintains a massive strategic petroleum reserve of approximately 1.4 billion barrels, enough to sustain its entire economy for roughly 4 months. Even if all imports were suddenly cut off, this enormous buffer gives Beijing the flexibility it needs to gradually reduce its dependence on Iranian oil without triggering immediate domestic shortages or price spikes. Let me be very clear with you about the devastating implications if China begins to replace even half of its Iranian oil imports with American and Saudi crude. As the new agreement strongly suggests, Iran will lose between 700,000 and 800,000 barrels per day in sales at current discounted prices. That translates to a monthly revenue loss of hundreds of millions of dollars. For a regime already crippled by sanctions, this is not just painful, it is potentially existential. This direct economic pressure, orchestrated by a former ally, represents a significant departure from traditional sanctions, which often rely on multilateral enforcement. China's willingness to actively shift its energy procurement away from Tehran, rather than merely complying with Western embargoes, creates a far more immediate and potent threat to Iran's financial stability. That money does not go to schools or hospitals. It goes directly into the coffers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It pays the salaries of hundreds of thousands of IRGC fighters and militiamen. It funds Hezbollah operations in Lebanon, Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, and the regime's vast internal security apparatus. Cut this revenue stream, and the IRGC's ability to maintain control begins to crumble. This is why many analysts now describe this economic pressure as more dangerous to the Iranian regime than any direct military strike. A missile can be intercepted, and actions can sometimes be evaded. But losing your largest customer for discounted oil, especially when that customer is actively pivoting toward your enemy, is almost impossible to replace quickly. On the other side, the United States and Saudi Arabia are ready to fill the gap. The new Trump-Xi agreement for 600,000 barrels of American oil per day is only the beginning. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Brazil, and even Russia have the capacity to redirect supplies. Within 6 to 12 months, Iran's oil exports could be largely replaced on the global market, leaving Tehran increasingly isolated and desperate. I have spent hours examining the trade data, shipping records, and statements from both sides. The pattern is unmistakable. China is not abandoning Iran overnight. That would be too provocative. Instead, it is executing a calculated, gradual squeeze, a slow-motion economic strangulation dressed in the language of diplomacy and mutual benefit. This shift also explains the timing of the summit. Just one day after the naval confrontation in the Strait of Hormuz, Beijing used the meeting with Trump to demonstrate that it can play both sides, projecting power in the Gulf while simultaneously cutting better deals with Washington. The picture is now crystal clear. By leveraging its enormous oil demand, China holds one of the most powerful cards in the Iran crisis, and it has just signaled it is willing to play that card. The Iranian regime understands this perfectly, which is precisely why, as I will reveal in the next chapter, they responded so quickly with a major 5-day military exercise called Martyr Commander. Stay with me because the real battle for Iran is no longer just about missiles and drones in the Strait of Hormuz. It is about oil flows, bank accounts, and the survival of the Revolutionary Guard's iron grip on power. And that battle has already begun. Let me show you how Iran responded. And it did not take long. Just hours after the Trump-Xi summit concluded in Beijing on the 14th of May, 2026, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, launched a large-scale 5-day military exercise named Martyr Commander. The timing was deliberate and unmistakable. This was Tehran's immediate answer to the strategic earthquake that had just shaken its most important economic lifeline. The drill, conducted across multiple locations, including the Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, and key coastal provinces, involved thousands of IRGC personnel, fast attack boats, drone squadrons, missile units, and coastal defense forces. State media broadcast dramatic footage of speedboats swarming in formation, Shahed-type drones filling the sky, and anti-ship missiles being test-fired. The name Martyr Commander itself was a clear reference to fallen IRGC leaders, designed to invoke sacrifice, loyalty, and defiance. But beneath the fiery rhetoric and impressive visuals lies a much more sobering reality. This exercise was not primarily about sending a message to America or China. It was first and foremost an internal operation, a desperate attempt by the IRGC to reinforce its own ranks and project strength at a moment of growing vulnerability. The Iranian regime is facing severe economic hardship, recent military setbacks, and dangerous internal power struggles. The sudden threat of losing major oil revenue from China has only deepened these cracks. Senior IRGC commanders understand the danger. By launching this high-profile drill so quickly after the Beijing summit, they are trying to do 3 things at once. First, to boost morale among their fighters and commanders who may be questioning the regime's direction. Second, to distract the Iranian public from worsening economic conditions, skyrocketing inflation, fuel shortages, and unpaid salaries. And third, to suppress growing internal divisions within the regime itself. Hardliners and reformist factions have been clashing more openly, and the IRGC needs to reassert its dominance as the true guardian of the revolution. In public statements, IRGC spokesmen described the exercise as a strong response to foreign conspiracies and a demonstration of Iran's readiness to defend its waters. Yet the scale and timing reveal deep anxiety. When a regime feels cornered diplomatically and economically, it often turns to military theater to project power it can no longer easily afford. This is classic IRGC psychology. When facing pressure from the outside, double down on internal control and external provocation. The message they want the world to receive is clear. We are not weak. We will not back down. We can still disrupt the Strait of Hormuz if pushed too far. However, the very need to launch such a visible exercise so rapidly after the Trump meeting actually exposes Iran's weakness. A truly confident and stable regime would not need to respond this dramatically to a diplomatic summit. The speed and intensity of Martyr Commander suggests the leadership in Tehran is rattled. I have analyzed similar past exercises. They often precede heightened tensions or serve as cover for internal purges. This time feels different. The combination of lost oil revenue, diplomatic isolation, and the IRGC's own growing control over the state is creating a dangerous feedback loop. The picture is now crystal clear. While China and America were shaking hands in Beijing, Iran responded with missiles and drones in the Gulf. But this show of force is less about strength and more about survival. It reveals a regime that feels the ground shifting beneath its feet. Stay with me because behind this military exercise lies an even more important question. Who is truly in control of Iran right now? In the next chapter, I will reveal how the IRGC has seized near total power over the Iranian state and why they desperately need this crisis to continue. The real story in Tehran is far darker than the fiery images coming out of their latest drill. Let me show you who truly rules Iran in 2026. While the world watches the theatrics of the Martyr Commander exercise, real power in Tehran no longer rests with the elected president or even the supreme leader alone. It rests with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and its hardline commanders who have quietly seized control of nearly every lever of the Iranian state. At the center of this power structure stands IRGC Commander Ahmad Vahidi. In recent weeks, Vahidi has taken unprecedented steps. He has blocked the Iranian president from freely appointing his own cabinet, directly supervises key diplomatic communications, and has been granted authority to command all military and security operations during wartime. This is not advisory power, this is de facto control. The overt consolidation of power by a military figure like Vahidi, directly overriding civilian authority and diplomatic channels, is a stark deviation from even Iran's own revolutionary governance model. It signals a profound internal shift, where the IRGC is no longer merely an influential force, but has become the undisputed operational core of the state. The IRGC now dominates approximately 40% of Iran's entire economy. Its vast business empire stretches across telecommunications networks, major ports, oil smuggling routes, construction conglomerates, and key banking institutions. It controls the country's internal security apparatus, the Beijing militia, and countless proxy forces across the region. In practice, the IRGC has transformed from a revolutionary guard into a parallel state, a state within a state that answers to no one but itself. Let me be very clear with you about what this means. The IRGC does not want peace. It needs conflict, preferably a prolonged, manageable crisis to justify its continued dominance. As long as the Strait of Hormuz remains tense and the threat of war with America or Israel lingers, the IRGC can maintain emergency powers, silence critics, and protect its enormous economic interests. Every drone attack, every speedboat provocation, and every missile test reinforces their narrative. Only we can defend the revolution. But if peace were to suddenly arrive, if oil revenue stabilized and international pressure eased, ordinary Iranians would begin asking dangerous questions. Why does a military organization control 40% of the national economy? Why do IRGC-linked companies dominate ports, banks, and telecommunications, while ordinary citizens struggle with inflation and shortages? Why is the Revolutionary Guard richer and more powerful than the state itself? This is the IRGC's greatest fear. Peace threatens their very existence as Iran's shadow government. That is why they are doubling down on confrontation, even as China tilts toward Washington and their oil lifeline begins to dry up. I have studied the internal dynamics carefully. The recent power struggles between reformist elements in the government and hardliners in the IRGC have grown more intense. Vahidi's moves to block cabinet appointments and centralize control over diplomacy are clear signs of a slow-motion coup that is already well underway. The IRGC is no longer content to be the sword of the regime. It now wants to be the brain, the heart, and the wallet as well. This concentration of power creates a dangerous paradox for Iran. The more the IRGC tightens its grip to survive, the more isolated and fragile the country becomes. Every provocative action in the Strait of Hormuz is not just aimed at America, it is also a domestic survival strategy. By keeping the region on edge, the IRGC justifies its economic empire and silences calls for reform. The picture is now crystal clear. What we are witnessing is not a normal military force defending a nation. We are watching a powerful ideological economic mafia fighting for its continued supremacy. The IRGC understands that if China reduces oil purchases, if diplomatic isolation deepens, and if economic pressure mounts, their grip on power could finally begin to slip. That is why they responded to the Trump-Xi summit with the Martyr Commander exercise. That is why they continue to push tensions in Hormuz. And that is why the next phase of this crisis is so dangerous. Stay with me because in the next chapter, I will reveal the three powerful levers China now holds over Iran. Levers that could accelerate the IRGC's decline or force them into a desperate, unpredictable reaction. The real battle for Iran's future is no longer just on the water. It is a brutal internal struggle for survival between a cornered revolutionary guard and a changing international order. And the world is about to feel the consequences. Let me show you the three powerful levers China now holds over Iran. Levers that could fundamentally change the balance of power in the Middle East. After the Trump summit, Beijing has moved from passive observer to active player. It is no longer protecting Iran out of ideological loyalty. It is using its enormous influence as a calculated tool of diplomacy and self-interest. The first lever, reducing Iranian oil purchases. As I explained earlier, China buys 1.6 million barrels of Iranian oil per day. The new agreement to purchase 600,000 barrels of American crude daily is the beginning of a deliberate shift. Beijing can gradually replace Iranian oil with supplies from the United States, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Brazil, and Russia. Within 6 to 12 months, Iran could lose the majority of its most important customer. This is economic strangulation at its most sophisticated. Every barrel China stops buying is hundreds of millions of dollars the IRGC will never see again. Money that funds salaries, weapons, and regional proxies. The second lever, withdrawing diplomatic protection at the United Nations. For years, China has used its veto power and influence in the UN Security Council to shield Iran from harsher international sanctions and resolutions. That protection is now in serious doubt. If Beijing stops blocking tough measures against Tehran, a new wave of coordinated international pressure could crash down on the Iranian regime. This diplomatic isolation would be devastating, especially at a time when Iran is already economically weakened. The third lever, Chinese Navy escorting tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. This is perhaps the most provocative and strategically brilliant move. There are growing indications that China may soon deploy its own warships to escort Chinese and even third-party oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. By doing so, Beijing would directly challenge Iran's ability to threaten or tax shipping in the waterway. It would also reduce America's monopoly on security in the Gulf. Imagine Chinese destroyers sailing alongside tankers while IRGC speedboats watch from a distance. A direct humiliation for Tehran and a powerful signal that the old rules no longer apply. Now let us turn to how Iran is trying to fight back in the Strait of Hormuz itself. The IRGC's strategy is brutally simple. They do not need to defeat the US Navy. They only need to make commercial shipping too expensive and too dangerous to continue. Their goal is to raise insurance premiums so high that shipping companies simply avoid the strait. If tanker traffic drops sharply, global energy markets go into chaos, and Iran gains leverage. To achieve this, the IRGC relies on asymmetric warfare tools it has perfected over years. Swarms of fast attack boats, Chinese-supplied anti-ship missiles, naval mines, and waves of Shahed drones. These cheap, numerous weapons are perfect for creating constant harassment in the narrow 21-mile choke point. One well-timed drone strike or mine incident is enough to spook the entire maritime insurance industry. The results are already visible. Qatar has temporarily halted LNG exports through the region. Around 230 non-Iranian oil tankers are currently stuck or rerouting, creating massive delays and higher costs. Global energy prices remain elevated, and analysts warn this disruption could keep energy costs artificially high for the next 2 to 3 years, affecting everything from European heating bills to Asian factory production. This is exactly what the IRGC wants: chaos without full-scale war. A permanent state of tension that justifies their control at home while punishing the international community for turning against them. However, this strategy is becoming more dangerous by the day. With Chinese naval vessels potentially entering the mix, the waters of Hormuz are turning into a crowded, high-risk arena where American, Chinese, and Iranian forces operate in extremely close proximity. The margin for miscalculation is almost zero. The picture is now crystal clear. China is squeezing Iran with sophisticated economic, diplomatic, and naval pressure. At the same time, the IRGC is desperately trying to create enough disruption in Hormuz to survive. This collision of interests has turned the world's most important energy corridor into a powder keg where three major players, America, China, and Iran, are all pursuing conflicting goals in the same narrow strip of water. Stay with me. In the final chapter, I will show you how America and its allies are responding militarily, what messages Russia and India are sending right now, and what this all means for the future of the region. The next 48 to 72 hours will be critical. The game in the Strait of Hormuz has never been more complex or more dangerous,